So anyway, if there's no more questions right away, I thought it might be interesting to go through and just share with you a little bit about how we used to manage the ranch, kind of the operating system we used to run under, and what we do now. So when I came to the ranch in 1997, and for a whole lot of years before me, we started calving right around the 1st of February. And if you've spent any amount of time in Colorado at all, you know that the 1st of February is not t-shirt weather. This is kind of a picture of what February calving looks like. You see those baby calves out in the snow. So what that means for the people on the ground is a lot of long hours during calving season, right? Because when those babies come out, they're wet, and the wet is what gets them. It's not that it's cold out, it's the fact that they're wet. Just like if you fall into a river, you'll turn hypothermic like that, as opposed to if you're dry, right? And so you'd have to get these calves in right away as soon as they were born and get them dried off, and then you had to get them right back with mom so they could get their colostrum as soon as possible, because that's their antibodies that they're getting. And so it was very labor intensive. For about 6 weeks, sleep didn't come very easily. Jen, my wife, she'd split the night shifts with me, and you'd probably get 4 hours of sleep a night for that 6 weeks. And you can imagine your mental state too by the end of that. So that's the way we used to do things. Why did we do it? Feed was cheap. That was probably the #1 reason. And the reason I say that is if you have a calf that's born earlier, so we wean our calves October-ish, October, November. The older that calf is, the more he's going to weigh. And that's how we make our money, right? We're selling pounds of calf. So the heavier calf we can sell, the more money we're going to get. To do it, it took about 550 tons of hay that we'd have to buy each year to feed these 300 mother cows. We don't have any hay grounds on the ranch. You saw those sub-irrigated meadows? We don't have any water rights, but even if we did, we don't have enough surface water to efficiently irrigate any of those pastures in typical years. And so, you know, we could put up maybe 50 tons of hay a year. Well, you can't even afford to own the equipment to do that. So we had to buy all of our supplemental feed from outside sources. And then feeders wanted that heavy calf at that point. You know, a steer gets slaughtered at 12 to 1,400 pounds. And so this is roughly halfway through its life, or its weight anyway. And so the reason they like that 550-pound calf is because they could buy that cheap feed as well and put it into that calf, and it could spend more time in the feedlot because they could afford to do that. Well, you forward to about 2005. When I came to the ranch in 97, we were paying $60 a ton for our hay. But in 2005, it went from $60 a ton. Well, it didn't do this overnight, but by 2005, it was up to $150 a ton. Well, if I had my calculator, let's see, we can do that. So 550 times 150. What is that? It'd be 55,000 and so $80,000 a year approximately is how much we would spend on feed. That was only our feed bill. And here was the problem. The calf prices weren't increasing proportionally to feed prices. And because feed was getting so expensive, that feeder didn't want a 550-pound feeder calf anymore. So he'd still buy them from you, but he was going to pay you a whole lot less for him. And this is where it put us. It put the Maxwell Ranch in a position where we were losing money. The manager before me, Gary, in his nearly 30 years of management, the ranch lost money 1 year. That's pretty significant. You don't hear that a lot in agriculture. And so he was doing something right, and February calving was working for him. But it was looking like with the price of feed and the price of calves, we were going to continue on a losing trend. And so it was time to figure out something else to do. So let's see. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it really put me in a position where I needed to make some decisions on what we might be able to do differently, right? And so about that time I attended this High Plains Ranch practicum. And I feel like in my mind, this is kind of where that switch started to happen for me. From me being an animal-focused guy to more of a range-focused guy. And you know, they probably do this, the animal guy and the range guy now. But it used to be the animal guy and all you range guys, right? But I really started to learn some things about range and how range could help us with our cattle operation. In any event, it really helped me figure out what our greatest expenses were, which was feed, and what our lowest cost resource was, and that's our rangeland. We have our rangeland, it's paid for, right? And so considered some different types of livestock operations. I could have done the same thing we'd always been doing. It worked for a long time. It wasn't going to keep working. And my boss is a smart enough lady that she probably wouldn't have let me get away with that for very long. She would have brought somebody in that could make some changes that would work. So that didn't seem like a real good option. Considered other types of livestock. Well, for one, Fred Maxwell wanted the ranch to be used for the betterment of the beef industry, so don't really see how getting rid of all the cows and running other types of livestock honor that. And then on top of that, we've got a pretty significant population of predators on the ranch. We've got mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats, all three of which can be pretty hard on sheep and goats. And those were really the two other livestock types that I was thinking about. And then a different age class of cattle, yearlings, for reasons I won't get into right now, that wasn't really an option for us. But where we landed was changing our calving season. And so again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things that I did, I have to prepare a budget every year for the Research Foundation. And I was able to take different scenarios of different calving seasons. So these blue columns represent a February-March calving season. I knew what those numbers were because we'd done it for forever. And compared that to a May-June calving season and an April-May calving season. And then I'd used high calf prices and high feed prices and high calf and low feed and so on. And you can see in every one of those columns, that May-June calving season came out on top except for this one here with the February-March, or with that high calf and low feed prices. And really, that's where we were when feed was so cheap, right? Relatively speaking, our calves were worth enough more money that it put a February-March calving season on top. So, and then not as much from a financial standpoint, but what our cows' needs were and what the native range had to provide. This was another thing I considered. So if you look at this is a 12-month, this is a year in the life of a cow, right? A mother cow specifically. And so when you wean your calves, that's when her nutritional requirements are the lowest. And as she goes through pregnancy, her requirements start to increase, and by that third trimester, her nutritional requirements are really starting to go up. When you hit calving, and shortly thereafter, that's when her requirements are the most. So she's just had that calf and she's starting to milk, and that calf is really starting to eat, you know, after a couple of months or after a month or so. And then as you head towards breeding, you can see kind of the way all that goes. Now think about our native rangeland. You don't even have to be a range person to understand this, right? Or to have some picture of it. What time of year do you think our nutritional quality of our range is going to be at its highest point? Just a general. Summer. Early summer. That's when the most nutrition is going to be available. Well, if you take our a chart of our February-March calving season. That's the blue line. Her requirements and what's available in our native range don't line up very well. And that's why we had to buy that 550 tons of high quality feed, is to meet her requirements, because our native range couldn't do it. Not only that, but if you're going to calve in February and March, your cattle have to be in close. You can't have them out on range. You've got to be able to be there when those calves are born. Well, look what happens when we moved our calving season to May, June. Those lines match up a whole lot better. And so we're not having to buy all that high quality supplemental feed. So it really made us less dependent on outside people, right? And we were able to better utilize what we had. Now, if we had irrigated hay grounds and we could raise all that feed, it might make more sense for us to calve early, but we don't have that option. And so it'd be silly for me to go out there and tell other producers that this is the only way to do it. Well, they don't have the same resources that we do, or they may not. For people that have our similar resources, this is probably not a bad option depending on your environment. If you're up in Walden, Colorado, and all you have is pasture, this still won't work there because their winters are harsh. You know, when they get snow early, they're covered up until May, and they've got to feed hay. So that's where the savings was for us, is we eliminated that high feed dependency. We used to feed that 550 tons, now we feed about 70. And the only reason we do that is to supplement their protein needs for their last trimester of pregnancy. And this is one of my top hens in the driver's seat. That's Casey. I think she was 3 there. And she was driving the feed truck for Mom while I was out enjoying myself taking pictures. So in May of 2007, that's when we made the switch. Just delayed turning our bulls out for 3 months. And so instead of breeding the 1st of May, we turned the bulls out to breed the 1st of August. And 2008 was our first year to calve in May, and I'm happy to say that the changes have been successful. We've been operating in the red really pretty much since then, minus one pretty tough year that we'll talk about here in a minute. Here was another big benefit that I saw in changing our calving season. That was an improved quality of life. I think you could ask Jen, my wife, and it's probably a whole lot easier being married to me now in February and March than it used to be. She's always easy to get along with, but I turned into kind of a bear when I had that amount of lack of sleep. Even for these cows, I mean, can you imagine a calf being born in February and March as opposed to May or June? You know, it's probably a little easier environment to come out into. Not really that big of a deal for the calf if there's a rancher right there to take care of you, but if the rancher is not right there to take care of you, that's a harsh environment to go from that 90-some degree environment inside Mom out to 10 below. Now our brandings, this top left picture, we got cowboys out there in t-shirts at our branding in July. When we used to have to do it in April, you can see everybody's got a jacket on there, and we would often have to cancel brandings because of snow or rain or who knows what you're going to get in April. So just a whole lot better quality of life, I feel like. Now when we used to be calving, now our cows are still out grazing. And as much as I cuss the wind, we depend on the wind to blow our pastures open after a snowstorm. As much as it does blow it, it really usually only takes a couple of days for pastures to blow open after you get a couple feet of snow, which isn't, we get 1 or 2 of those a year, but they do blow open relatively quickly. So.